Hi everybody, welcome to the Marshall Monday in a very, very hot place in the UK. Imagine doing 90 degrees without air conditioning, and that's what all of us who are in the UK are doing currently, and we're all missing the office greatly because of that. Anyway, welcome today. Today we are visiting Imperial College London, so one of our London universities, and we're really excited to visit. It's an amazing university that we have visited every study tour, so Catherine's done very well. So thank you very much, and I'm going to, with no further ado, hand over to Catherine. Catherine.
Thank you, and yes, sorry not to be able to have you here this year. We're very lucky to have you visit each time, and certainly hope we will do so again in the future. So just share my screen, hopefully you can see that. So thank you very much for tuning into this session. You're just going to have a very brief introduction, just a few minutes on Imperial kind of as a whole, from me to kick off, to give you a little bit of background about the institution for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar with us. I'll then be passing over to Dr. Miranda Mills, who's going to give us a brilliant guest lecture on her area within sort of conservation and life sciences and the environment, and then we're going to hear from hopefully 4 of our fantastic current graduate students, so a bit of their background, and then we'll all be very happy to hear from you in terms of any questions you have. So kicking off for us. So in terms of Imperial, for those of you who don't know us, we're quite unique in the UK, being solely focused on STEM subjects as well as business school, business at graduate level. We're kind of a medium-sized university in UK terms. So we have kind of around 20,000 students and roughly half undergraduate and graduate split. We generally do quite well in the kind of rankings, sort of world rankings, UK rankings, but obviously, you know, everyone takes those with a bit of pinch of salt. But I like to highlight a couple of ones I think kind of talk about us as an institution. So we've been voted the UK's most innovative university for the last few years, and that's kind of really due to a programme of kind of entrepreneurship we've set up. We've supported a number of sort of student and staff startup companies come out of Imperial, and I'll mention a little bit about that programme momentarily. Also to mention that we are the UK's most international university as well, which we're very proud of. So this comes from kind of international collaborations in research and partnerships, as well as our student population. You can see there over 60% of our students actually come from outside the UK, and that's from over 140 different countries. So we're a very kind of international university, very reflective of London itself, with the kind of cosmopolitan mix of people there. So I mentioned we're kind of STEM focused, but we do have a very wide range of programs. So full range of engineering departments open to graduate students, full range of life sciences, chemistry, environmental policy programs within the Faculty of Natural Sciences. And then in medicine, we have one of the largest cohorts of graduate students studying medical programs, ranging from kind of public health to more kind of clinical programs. And then in business school, we have a whole range of kind of finance, marketing, and other kind of entrepreneurship programs as well. As well as these main kind of teaching schools, we then have a number of institutes that kind of join our scientists and our engineers and our business faculty together to kind of work on global challenges. So we have areas such as the Energy Futures Lab, the Grantham Institute for Climate Change, for example, and the Institute for Security Science and Technology. And speaking of working on the world's kind of biggest problems at the moment, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we're involved in right now in the fight against COVID-19. I know we can't go too far without kind of getting away from it, but just to say we've been very much at the forefront, whether it's advising government policy, developing a vaccine. So we are one of the UK institutions developing a vaccine right now, fingers crossed, whether it's testing or indeed kind of producing things like ventilators, or even our chemical engineering department have been producing hand sanitizer en masse as well. So I mentioned just a little bit about the kind of entrepreneurship side. So just to highlight that students can get involved no matter which degree program they're studying in our entrepreneurship and enterprise kind of programs, whether that's accessing things like the hack space, even if they're doing, say, public health, for example, to joining kind of pitching competitions, mentorship schemes, hackathons. These are available to all students at all levels of study. We also support our graduate students through our professional skills development programs as well. So whether that's particular kind of presentation or careers development, as well as kind of teaching opportunities. We do have a fantastic careers service, so to highlight that, that is available to them after they leave us as well. So we will kind of help them, whether it's looking at online vacancies or supporting them kind of developing their resume moving forward as well. And just to kind of wrap up, to kind of show that, you know, we do have some of the best kind of career prospects for our graduates as a result of all that we kind of arm them with during their time. They join a global network of alumni across the globe, and just to highlight, we've kind of added this new platform for them, Imperial Plexus, so that they can stay connected after they leave us much more easily. So whether that's kind of arriving in a new city and kind of finding out who's there and for them to meet up, or indeed posting job vacancies, for example, Plexus allows them to stay connected to us after that. Speaking of which, staying connected, that's a very quick run through of Imperial, because I know you want to hear from much more interesting people than me, but there are lots of ways to stay connected to us. Do reach out for me directly if you have any questions, but obviously social media, we're doing kind of online sessions depending on your interest, and we also have kind of opportunities to chat to our students digitally as well. That's a very quick run through of Imperial. Obviously happy to take any questions at the end as well, but I very much want to pass over to Dr. Marina Mills now.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'll share my screen with you guys, and I'm going to be talking about some of my research. And just to emphasize some of Catherine's points, I think the cool thing about this research is that it is a very international research project. So I'm originally from Brazil, and then I moved from Brazil to Australia, where I did my studies and I did my PhD, and then I had this amazing opportunity at Imperial College London to kind of build on this research project, and so I moved here in a lecturer position, and this research project is basically like just a collaboration between academics and NGOs and some government people who work in government, and they the whole idea of this research is to be very applied. So again, potentially showcasing some of the I guess the research that is really applied within Imperial. So this project is called Insights for Catalyzing Conservation. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene has resulted in changes to the environment that humans could have never even dreamed of, right? Our impact on the environment is huge. And we can even imagine what we would have done, especially for areas like the marine systems, right? So we turned oceans from thriving habitats full of fish of all shapes and sizes to barren deserts where all that you can see is jellyfish, unfortunately. Oops. So ancient habitats, such as coral reefs, which I used to dive a lot when I was in Australia, have bleached and died at unprecedented scales. And while this damage is not all irreversible, some of it is. So people have taken restoration and conservation into their own hands. So this project is a project in Brazil where a landscape was transformed that was basically a very degraded landscape back to a productive one, where species who used to thrive there decades ago thrive again. So these photographs show the transformation of one property by a photographer called who's owned by a photographer called Sebastião Salgado, who decided to reforest it when he bought the property as a side project. He's actually a very influential photographer around the world. And you can see that the whole area was completely transformed. And my colleagues and I study initiatives like this that have reached scale. So we're trying to find out the secrets to their success and the commonalities between them so that they can be replicated into the future. To do this, we use a a lot of theory, right? So we embed our work in this theory-based framework, which is about understanding the establishment, the sustainability or the persistence, and the spread of conservation initiatives. This framework talks about, is focused around principles that support each of these processes. And we're trying to learn from and both inform practice by providing a diagnostic tool that allows for organizations for organizations to kind of organize their experiences and think through their experiences, and at the same time testing all the different hypotheses associated to these processes. So I'm going to talk to you today about the scaling of conservation initiatives, right? So when they're adopted at a broad scale, and widespread adoption, and generally quickly. And just to show you what I mean by scaling, I wanted to show you this little video. See if I can make it quick. Well, this is the community, Namibia Community Conservancies, and this is an initiative which is driven by the communities themselves, of course, with the help of lots of international NGOs. But the idea is that the communities are kind of taking back a lot of the rights to manage their land. And you can see that from a few different sites, it's actually spread quite widely across Namibia, and it's spread a lot more. This is until 2005, but now it's even more widespread. So to study the spread of these conservation initiatives, we use a theory called diffusion of innovation theory. So this is where this project starts getting quite multidisciplinary, right? So we're trying to tackle this environmental problem that is generally tackled through the lens of ecology, but this diffusion of innovation theory is actually comes from sociology, and it's been applied actually in a range of different areas such as medicine and business, but to date it had never really been applied to environmental problems. So this diffusion of innovation theory looks at three different elements of I guess a problem or of the initiative. So the initiative itself, right? So what we call the innovation, the adopters or the people who are adopting that initiative. So that might be individuals or communities or a state government or municipal government, and contextual factors as well. For example, legislation that's supporting the implementation of that policy, or even geographical context, which might influence the extent to which one community can actually speak to the other. So as I was saying, this is quite it's an initiative that is, we've got case studies around the world. So here I'm just showing you the community-based conservation initiative case studies, which we have in Mexico, Philippines, all around the Pacific, Madagascar, Kenya, Chile, etc. We also have private protected area initiatives, which I haven't added to this image yet, but basically these are all around Europe and Brazil and around Australia. What we've found so far using in this project, using mathematical models and collaborating with mathematicians, is that most conservation initiatives follow this fast, slow, fast model of, slow, fast, slow model of spread. So basically it means that spread is limited by communication. In the same way that with I guess everybody's been talking about the COVID models, right? Where spread is limited by, or is influenced by us having contact with each other. The adoption of these initiatives is also limited by people communicating with each other about the benefits of those initiatives. The other this kind of orange line is kind of where most of these conservation initiatives spread. Some of them spread in this fast slow model where communication and interaction between different adopters isn't as important. So while the mechanism of spread is consistent across most of the case studies, the rate and the level of adoption is very context specific. So this is a map of the Philippines, and within some regions you find that there's very high adoption, and these are the areas where there's the most number of NGOs or and I guess universities which are working within marine conservation, while there's other areas which are less, where adoption has been less, has spread a lot more slowly, and these are generally have political turmoil or are areas that are a little bit more isolated. Interestingly, so when we started working through our case studies, we started going choosing the case studies that we knew were the kind of flagship case studies in conservation science, where people had talked a lot about that conservation initiative scaling. But what we found is that none of the initiatives that we looked at actually had both really high level of uptake and a really fast level of uptake. They either had one or the other. So regardless, in all these initiatives, we can still improve the extent to which they are adopted, or the speed at which they are adopted, by thinking a little bit more about how we design them to facilitate adoption. So now I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite case studies, which is the locally managed marine areas in Fiji. Locally managed marine areas are this marine management, and I'll show you a little diagram of how they work in a little bit. But this is this case study my colleague Mike Masha and I wrote about in 2018, and this wonderful lady here is a postdoc within the university, within Conservation International, who's collaborating with the university, and she's doing more empirical analysis on this case study. So I'm not sure how much you guys know about the Pacific and I guess that part of the world, but coastal villages within Pacific countries are highly dependent on fish for sale and subsistence. Fish like this one, which is the coral trout. Yet within the past decade, the fish caught are getting smaller, and the commercial fisheries have become increasingly unsustainable. So government often lacks the resources to invest in resource management, even though the population is really highly dependent on these resources. So the fish are getting smaller, and you can see the boy's disappointment in his face, the disappointment in this boy's face. Governments have other priorities, and a growing population, new and more efficient fishing technology, and more fishing boats from overseas actually threatens the food security of a lot of these Pacific coastal communities. So what happens is basically the fish, like the coral trout, is getting smaller. In Fiji, in response to the lack of government resources for management and the growing recognition that villagers could manage their own resources, resource management rights were decentralized and given back to the traditional owner. So in this next image, you'll, sorry. You'll so here you have, I'll show you so basically here you see a locally managed marine area, and the local, so much like in the States or in the rest of Europe, we have our, people own particular pieces of land. In the Pacific, a lot of the marine areas are owned by clans, or they're owned by families as well, right? So there might be a particular reef which is owned by, or the use with, or a particular family has resource use rights over, and those resource use rights are passed on from family to family in lots of very complicated ways. In Fiji, Fiji is actually quite an exception within the Pacific, but a lot of these traditional territories have been delineated, right? So that's what this dashed line represents. within a locally managed marine area, you have this you know, the traditional area of a village or of a community, and you have lots of areas within that have different management interventions within them. So you might have areas that are permanently closed. So so you can't fish in there at all. Some areas there might be some conditional closures, so you can fish in them sometimes, and then other areas will have other sorts of management arrangements. So you can't necessarily fish in there with poison, or you can't fish there with particular gear types. But it's all kind of this patchwork of management, just so you know what I'm talking about. So resource management tools like those that were established with the locally managed marine areas were used in many Pacific countries traditionally. So for example, in Fiji, when a chief dies, a proportion of the community's fishing ground is set aside as a no-take, or what they call a tambu area, as a token of respect for the chief. So after about 100 days, the area is reopened, and then the community harvests the fish to hold a feast to end the mourning of that chief. The abundance and the size of the catch is actually considered to reflect the supernatural powers of the chief, which I quite like. In other areas, you have areas which have been protected because people believe that they have a particular connection with a particular species. So for example, sharks and crocodiles are some of the species that different clans might be connected to. And if there's areas that are known to have large aggregations of these animals, no fishing might be allowed within that area. So when implementing a locally managed marine area, a lot of these traditions are actually revitalized. So when an area is, when fishing is forbidden within a particular area, fish have a chance of surviving longer. And fish, different to humans, actually produce more eggs the older they get. So protecting these older fish guarantees that both fish are getting bigger, that guarantees that those bigger fish actually can produce all these eggs. And it also guarantees that when, so these eggs can spill over to these adjacent areas and replenish the areas where potentially these bigger fish aren't around anymore. And there's also I guess when the restrictions are lifted, the communities have access to these bigger fish, right? So people like the idea of, people benefit, the fisheries, their fisheries benefits from establishing these locally managed marine areas. So I guess you implement these locally managed marine areas, and the fishing side, the size of the fish increases. So communities believe that implementing these locally managed marine areas actually gives them a range of benefits. So apart from these benefits associated to and more fish, there's food security for future generations. There's also, by establishing these rules that were traditionally based on traditional beliefs and customs, the LMMA also has this other benefit, which is about strengthening culture and the respect for elders. And as a result of that, there's community empowerment, right? And people are managing to as fishermen, and the communities are empowered by their own identity, as they're linking up with their own cultures and traditions, but also because they're given the rights to manage their resources. By engaging with outside agencies that promote these LMMAs, the Fijians are given access to information about locally managed marine areas, marine biology, a range of different bits of information, and there's potentially added benefits with having interactions with outsiders. And this is all done in a way that's actually really compatible with the way that these fishermen live, right? So, for example, this man over here, and this is his house. The area in front of his house is a part of a locally managed marine area, and he's the fish warden for that locally managed marine area. So he doesn't have to do much to be able to oversee that area. He can sit in his on his kitchen table, which is basically just behind this window that he's standing beside, and actually look at what's happening within the area. So in Fiji, the promise of benefits of these initiatives has spread from village to village, and through the promotion of locally managed marine areas by this locally managed marine area network. This locally managed marine area network was an organization that was developed to support the implementation of these areas in Fiji. And it really focused upon developing these social networks and strengthening connections between the leaders across these different villages, so that they're learning from each other as well as learning from outsiders. So locally managed marine areas will attend municipal meetings, and they'll encourage these village leaders to talk about what their experiences with locally managed marine areas are within those municipal meetings. So the village heads are listening to these experiences from each other. The other thing that they've done that's been really interesting is that they provide very clear and very easy to understand information about locally managed marine areas and how they should be set up and what the benefits are. So this is something that communities can just get the information online, and that also implement these initiatives themselves. So they've been so successful in Fiji that if this is a map of Fiji, and so the gray areas around Fiji are basically the areas that are traditionally owned. The dark gray areas are the areas which have villages that have locally managed marine areas within them. So a lot of Fiji, a lot of the marine area in Fiji, you can see is actually got is managed through locally managed marine areas, and over 400 villages in Fiji have implemented them. The benefit, I was saying before that we use this theory to understand, social science theory to understand what's going on, and the benefit of it is that it's actually really allowed us to kind of structure our understanding of the process. So by looking at lots of different elements that could potentially influence spread, and figuring out which of these elements are influential and which ones aren't. So if we go back to the theory here with the locally managed marine area story, the relative advantage has played a really big role in terms of why people have engaged in that initiative, right? And it's not about conservation necessarily, but there's a ton of other advantages such as fisheries tenure, food security, local customs, etc. that has really allowed, I guess, allowed for the success and spread of locally managed marine areas. These areas are also very compatible with the local values and the social organization of the area, which also has allowed them to I guess, be uptaken more readily. So that's basically a lot of the background to the locally managed marine areas. But what we're doing in this project now is we have students, postdocs, and the students are master students and PhD students, and even some undergraduate students are helping us out, looking at different case studies around the world. And we're looking at the commonalities and across the initiatives and the different geographies in terms of the factors that have facilitated or hindered the spread of these different conservation initiatives. And I'm talking about both the restoration of forests, for example, or the restoration of habitats and the conservation of habitats. So this is one of my PhD students, Cristina Romero. She's looking at UMAs in Mexico. This is Sarah Milligan. She was a master's student of mine last year, and she looked at the communal conservancies in Namibia. And this is Emily Lewis Brown and Hope Beatty. So Emily is a PhD student, and she was working with Hope Beatty, and both of them were working in Madagascar with locally managed marine areas. So looking across, for example, the work of these 4 students, we're finding that some of the critical factors facilitating community-based conservation initiatives is the relative advantage of adoption, compatibility of that initiative with people's values and interests, how flexible these initiatives really are, and the availability of assistance or support organizations for the communities that want to engage with that initiative. So what's the point of all of this, and how can we use this to inform practice? How can we use this research to inform practice? Well, scientifically, we're I guess testing assumptions about the factors that lead to scaling to strengthen the available evidence to everyone, right? For more science and also for practitioners. But really, what's driven this project, and the reason that there's so much interest in this project, is because the results are being directly used to develop more effective strategies to implement and scale different conservation initiatives. So as we're continuously talking to boards of lots of different international conservation organizations or people who work in government or with governments to help expand. We're also trying to develop a tool which would assess the likelihood of scaling and the key changes needed to aid scaling for different conservation initiatives. So here you would have resource managers who might develop this resource management practice, or might be thinking about, you know, what's the likelihood that people actually engage and adopt it, and how likely is it to spread? How likely is it to spread? And they'll be able to use some of those tools to I guess, predict how successful it's going to be. Oops. So here is just a slide to show you just the different people who have been involved in this initiative so far. There's actually another 5 master's students from this year that I haven't managed to add to the slide yet, but I will be doing that very shortly. And thank you so much for listening, and I hope you found that interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Some incredibly important work, and really interesting to hear all the kind of initiatives around the world, what you're doing with it. So yeah, fantastic, thank you. Now going to pass over to some of our students. I'm sure you're dying to ask them kind of the real questions, but I'm delighted to be joined by 4 of our graduate students who will introduce themselves. Maybe just starting off alphabetically. Crystal, I believe you're on the line now.
Hello, my name is Crystal. I am a PhD student in the aeronautics department through the Marshall Scholarship. I do research on design and modeling of flying swimming robots, and I started in 2019.
And so I think Josie will be next alphabetically.
Hi, I'm Josie. I am also a PhD student at Imperial in the Department of Brain Sciences. My work focuses on studying balance and postural control and adaptation and plasticity in the brain.
Brilliant, thank you. And over to Miriam.
Hi, my name is Miriam Axel. I'm originally from Boston in the US. I did my undergrad in Montreal, Canada, with semesters in Paris and in Florence, Italy. And I'm currently a PhD student. I'm a President Scholar PhD student at the Center for Environmental Policy. I also did my MSc at the Center for Environmental Policy in 2014 to 2015. And I'm just wrapping up my research now, submitting in a couple of weeks. My PhD looks at environmental and health and community impacts of hydraulic fracturing in the UK, with case studies that have been looking at the US, California, New York, China, France, and Algeria.
And finally, Rob.
Hi everyone, my name's Rob Drummond. I'm originally from Haymarket, Virginia, so just 40 minutes outside of DC. I studied undergrad at the US Military Academy, and my background was civil engineering there. And then here at Imperial, I am doing a taught course this year titled Advanced Materials for Sustainable Infrastructure. And then now the research project for this summer, I'm looking into hydrogen embrittlement in metals. And then from my experience at Imperial, I also participated this year on the baseball team. So if there's any questions like with clubs or anything related to that as well.
Brilliant. Maybe if I just kick off with one question for all of you guys. Was there anything that surprised you about coming to Imperial? Was there anything that kind of you weren't expecting or kind of was maybe a bit of a culture shock for you? Open to anyone?
Well, I think one thing is that, I mean, Catherine, you mentioned this before, and also from the talk that Marina gave. I think what's so impressive to me and so exciting about Imperial is that it's so international. And I think one of the things that kind of shocked me, and I think I've talked about this before, is not really realizing just how huge London is. So it's really great in terms of all the opportunities, but the fact that, you know, you feel like there's, it takes a while to get to know the city. I think that was something that I really wasn't expecting. I sort of came into to Imperial thinking that, you know, London was going to be just like another city that I was used to, like Boston or Paris. And I think that it's a positive thing because it means that the opportunities are kind of endless. And Imperial really does have a good sort of tight-knit community within this massive mega city.
Thanks. Anyone else want to add anything?
I think what shocked me the first week was just the amount of clubs and organizations that were there. I mean, I think during the Freshers Week, I think there's like over 120. And so, yeah, kind of adding on to what Miriam said, you know, London, when you first arrive, especially from out as an international student, can seem like very overwhelming. But there just are so many groups, and you can kind of find your niche with like people who have similar interests. So, I mean, it was shocking, but, you know, pleasantly shocking.
Okay. Josie or Crystal, anything to add? Oh, happy to open up to the floor.
I guess I would say the thing that was most shocking to me was how international both the school and the lab are. I think I did my undergrad at MIT, which is like pretty diverse from an international point of view, but not nearly as much as Imperial is. And so getting the opportunity to talk to and meet a lot of different people from all over Europe and all over the world has been pretty cool. Because I think everybody in my lab is from a different country, and that's been like a really cool, interesting experience.
Brilliant. Sorry, Josie, anything?
I would echo what Crystal said. I really appreciate working in such an international environment. You really get like a wide range of perspectives on worldviews as well as on research and academia. So that part of it is I wasn't totally expected for, but is really gratifying.
Brilliant. I can just see a question's popped up that maybe Morena, if you can answer. So asking about kind of the research trips, part of, you mentioned obviously masters and PhD students have taken part in the research around the world, how that kind of works in terms of how that side of things funded maybe?
Yeah, so for my master's project, I guess I've got grants for my project, so the funding has come basically from my grants. So it really depends on the supervisor and who I guess if the project's funded or not. Generally, a lot of the master's programs do have some funding associated to them for the research, but it wouldn't be in the scale of thousands of pounds. It would be in the scale of, it would be less than 1,000 pounds, I imagine. But yeah, but you probably, but if you manage to get into if the student manages to get into a lab that has a bit more funding for that research project, then they're obviously going to be welcome to use it.
I know, Miriam, you've done some trips abroad during your time, and please, the others add in afterwards as well. But do you want to just talk about your experience with that as well?
Yeah, I think I've been incredibly fortunate I first did the Imperial Tsinghua University exchange that was in an East Hampstead Park in the UK, and that was a week of, I think it was around 20 Tsinghua University in Beijing students and 20 Imperial students. And then from there was an opportunity to spend a month doing a research visit in Beijing. So that was part of where a lot of my research came, and that was really, I think first, both the initial exchange in East Hampstead Park was really eye-opening, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't know that China has the world's largest shale gas resources. So it was really interesting to speak to students and to kind of see a different side that I honestly hadn't really thought of as being an important part of my research. And then being able to spend a month there in Beijing, working with a professor, and having had the opportunity to meet students from Tsinghua before going there and kind of having a bit of a network was really incredible. And that was, I was incredibly fortunate to be supported by the graduate school for that. And then I also had the opportunity to spend 3 weeks in Campinas in Brazil. And that was really wonderful. That was funded through the Sao Paulo FAPESP grant that supported 3 weeks on, and it was a project on the water, energy, and food nexus. So those were the two kind of international trips that I did.
And anyone else done any trips at all? No. Okay. I can see some more questions come in for you guys, so the students. So has your research or course work experience been what you anticipated when you applied, or if not, how has it been different? Who wants to maybe jump first into that?
I can go ahead and try to answer that. I think that for me, it was less so of what I expected, in the sense that I have a lot more control over the research that I do in my project than I anticipated that I would. I think I did research pretty much all through undergrad, and I had gotten the impression that when you go into a PhD, you sort of have a really clear, well-defined project that your supervisor kind of hands you and is like, oh, well, these are the projects that the lab does. So you can work on this, and then you'll probably hopefully make some discovery somewhere, and then you'll get a PhD out of it. And that was really not the case for me. I know that in my application, I proposed something, which was really different, by the way, because applying to US PhD programs, I never had to propose any kind of project. And then from there, my supervisor and I had a lot of meetings in the first couple of months to really hammer out the details of what exactly it is I wanted to do research on, which was really cool.
Brilliant, thanks. Anyone else want to share their experience?
Yeah, I would just add to what Crystal was saying. I think it is important, to acknowledge the differences between the US and UK academic systems. Most PhDs, at least in STEM, in the US are, at least 5 years, probably closer to 7, and involve, teaching requirements. They involve extensive coursework for the first couple of years. Usually there's rotations that you go through before you actually commit to a specific lab group or research group. The difference here is that when you apply, you're applying to work with somebody specifically. Usually are expected to have some sense of a proposal when you apply, and from day one, immediately jumping into research without any coursework or teaching requirements. That I think that is part of the reason that the PhDs in the UK tend to be shorter, 3 to 4 years most of the time.
Any other comments on that?
I think,
I guess I'll just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I'll go after you. It's
Well, I
fine.
was just going to say that I mean, that really, both what Crystal and Josie said really resonates with me, because I think that, I guess because I applied to the PhD from the master's, I felt like I knew my supervisor already. I did my master's thesis with the same supervisor. So I can imagine the process of applying for a PhD from outside the UK is really different, because you are kind of thrown into the research quite quickly. There isn't the same kind of process as you know, from my understand from my friends in the US. And I think that one of the things that I really appreciated is the kind of freedom and the fact that a lot of it is kind of building the relationship with your supervisor and sort of seeing the project evolve, and you can sort of conceive something that you want to do, and then of course it can end up quite different. And especially now, I think that's really applicable in you know, these unprecedented times where people are suddenly with COVID and everything. But I think that there's a huge benefit to the flexibility of the UK system, but it really just takes kind of a strong communication with your supervisor throughout, and your department as well.
Thanks. And Rob?
Just from the like taught MSc perspective, I would say if you're going to do a taught course, definitely be ready for structure for the first two trimesters. And then the third trimester of the summer, what I'm doing now is for your thesis or our dissertation. That was what I expected. It's what I wanted, because I didn't really know or have a particular project I wanted to do. I mean, thus by applying for a taught course. So the two trimesters in the beginning really allow you to get to know. There'll be courses from all the different lecturers in the department, so you can see like what their interests are, and then you can pick and choose like where your interests align. And then for the dissertation term, you're able to, you know, align, I guess, make the optimal solution with or alignment with all of your lecturers. And then that's where you get, I guess, the same flexibility of what was described with the PhD students. So it's a little bit of both worlds, but definitely be ready for the structure part.
It goes by quickly too. I found the top courses go by really, really quickly. That was one thing that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's like this is a unique year because of the COVID-19, but yeah, this dissertation term definitely goes fast.
Brilliant, thanks. And someone's asked a question. Obviously, I mentioned in the presentation how international Imperial is, and you guys have mentioned how great it's been to kind of collaborate with international students from all around the world in your labs. But can you actually meet any British students? Have you been able to actually make friends with British students?
Personally, my lab is almost entirely international. Even my supervisor is not originally from the UK. I'm also not based on the main campus. I'm at the Charing Cross campus, and definitely as a PhD student, because there's no coursework in terms of, you know, going to class or attending regular lectures, and because I'm also not on the main campus, my interaction with other students has been somewhat minimal. I would say just in general, because Imperial and London are very international cities, it's easy to end up becoming friends with other international students. I generally have noticed that it is a bit harder to kind of learn to interact with the Brits and find ways to get to know them, but that's just my personal experience.
Thanks. Anyone actually managed to meet any Brits? Have we kept up our stiff upper lip a bit too much?
I've met a couple. There are a couple of people in my lab who did their undergrad and their master's at Imperial and are from the UK. And so I've talked to them, and then like a few other people from orientation and some of their friends, and like going out to do social things outside of the lab. But I would say still the majority have been international for sure.
And Rob, you mentioned you were part of the societies. Have you met many Brits through some of the societies at all? Yeah,
through the baseball team. So there's only one British person in my graduate course, but I found that through, there's a lot who wanted me to try cricket after doing baseball. But I think you can meet a lot of people through the clubs, but definitely be aware that I think, like Josie said, London itself is kind of an international city, so just reflective of that.
Miriam, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate to meet a lot of Brits on the Masters. I think if I'd come in for the PhD, and I have a lot of respect for both Crystal and Josie for coming into a PhD, because I think it is harder to meet people when you're not in a talk course. I know that the Center for Environmental Policy has I guess in normal times, we have Thursday policy seminars, which are followed by, you know, a glass or three of wine with your department. So it's a really great way to get to know everybody on the course. And I think my master's sounds like it was structured similar to yours, Rob, where at least the first semester is really kind of leveling the playing field, getting exposure to a lot of different courses. All 150 students are together. Then the second semester is broken up into options, so smaller groups. So there really are a lot more opportunities because they're taught courses, so it makes it easier to meet people. And I can imagine being in a lab where you don't have classes, you don't necessarily have the same socials. And I also felt the same way, that there were just way too many clubs. And I remember getting so excited when I first arrived to Imperial and signing up for everything. And then for the rest of the year, getting a million emails from everything I had signed up for. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities, and it's just a question of sort of being realistic about how much time you have in terms of, you know, what's possible to do.
Brilliant, thanks. A great question come up about housing. Obviously, that's always a big challenge for kind of graduate students in terms of, you know, you won't necessarily be in Imperial housing. Maybe start off with Josie. Do you want to share your experience of where you've been living? Obviously not kind of on the South Kensington campus, you've been based at Charing Cross.
Sure. So I started off, when I first moved, I was at Good Enough, which is a educational charity. It's based in Bloomsbury, so kind of east central London, which is basically a housing, or it's a dormitory, I guess, like organization for international students only, international postgraduate students only. And so definitely in terms of like meeting new people initially, a lot of people do like Good Enough because there are a lot of clubs, a lot of activities going on there, and it's a good way to meet people from other countries as well as your home country when you first arrive, especially if you don't know anybody. In terms of where I am now, I now live in a privately rented flat, mostly because I wanted to be closer to work, so I cut my commute from 40 minutes to 20. I know Imperial does have, I think it's called GradPad, which is available for graduate students. I think the main thing that's worth emphasizing is that a lot of the housing out there, whether it's private rentals or even places like GradPad, require that you have a UK-based guarantor. Otherwise, they require oftentimes that you pay large chunks at a time, either like 6 months or I think GradPad was the full year. And the guarantor needs to be based in the UK. They need to live and work in the UK, and you know, not everybody's going to have a connection that they can use for that. So that was part of the reason for me starting off at Good Enough, was because I didn't have any connections. I mean, even now I still pay rent 6 months at a time. And yeah, I think that's probably the most important. It's also hard to arrange housing before getting there, private housing, if you don't have your visa yet, which you normally, your biometric residence card, you won't get until you arrive in the UK. And so finding housing without that is kind of difficult in terms of private housing, which is another reason to pursue kind of Good Enough or Imperial's housing, or there's other private student halls available.
Thanks. Miriam, I know you've kind of moved around London a bit. Do you want to maybe share some of your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I really wanted to live in Good Enough. I think it was, I didn't get it. I think it was filled up. My mistake for the master's was that I applied too late. I had some friends who lived in GradPad and they had really good experiences. But yeah, like Josie mentioned, I think that it is harder for international students if you don't have a guarantor. I know that one thing that my friends really enjoyed about GradPad is the strong social scene. I ended up living in a private student halls called Depot Point in King's Cross. So it was, central London. That was for the master's. And then for the PhD, I pretty much did the same thing as you, Josie. I moved closer to Imperial. So I cut my commute from 45 minutes to 20 minutes. And I lived near South Kensington in an Airbnb. And part of the reason I did that was because it was easier. I didn't have to pay for, a big chunk of months at a time. And a lot of that was also because I was traveling quite a bit and I was doing research in other countries. So for the PhD, I had more flexibility. I think that one thing that I fell prey to a scam when I was going through Airbnb, and that was something that I wish I had at the time thought to contact the housing, the student housing center at Imperial. They have really good support, and I think that's something that is probably, if I were to do this all over again, I would have looked into housing a little bit earlier and maybe contacted the student housing center to get some advice beforehand.
Thanks. I'm conscious of the time. I just saw there's one question maybe to end the session on, in terms of what advice would be particularly useful to our audience in terms of being advisors. I guess I'm going to pass it over to the students. What would be your kind of key thing in terms of when the advisors are talking to students who may be potentially interested in the UK and potentially interested in Imperial? What would be your kind of sum up of your experience of Imperial, I guess? Maybe start with Crystal.
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand your question.
Just ask what's the kind of key, anything particularly helpful for the advisors when students come to talk to them and potentially thinking about the UK or potentially thinking about Imperial.
Oh, okay, got you. Sorry, I must have had a connection. No, so I think maybe for the advisors, like the biggest piece of advice I can give is explaining how you like to do research or anything of that nature, like for a PhD student, for example, up front, because I think if they're coming from the US and they have any kind of research experience, it can be a bit different just in terms of being expected to organize your own project and those kinds of things.
Great, thanks. Rob, anything you'd like to add from the kind of talk programs?
From the talk side, I would just, stress the difference between, I mean, in this case, if it's like an MSc and a taught course versus research, the differences in flexibility and structure, and then the timing for a UK 1-year course, because I think a lot of US universities are like 2 years. So while it is quicker, like Miriam said earlier, it is kind of crunched and compressed into 1 year. So.
I think that might take us up to our time. Is that right? Sarah and Mary?
Sure. If the other two have answers for the question, then we have time quickly if you want to answer it.
I guess I would just recommend maybe talking to current students. I think that's one thing that I wish I had done. I think there are a lot of things that you almost don't think about in terms of your daily life. And I think talking to current students both kind of helps you get more excited about a possibility if you're moving somewhere the next year, I think. But yeah, I guess my recommendation would be to connect with lecturers, professors, and students and kind of find, gather as much intel as you can kind of before leaving. And also I think that the mistake that I made was sort of not looking into housing and visas as early as I probably should have.
Thanks. And Josie?
Yeah, I echo everything that has been said already. I think also something to keep in mind in terms of geographical location. Cities like London, I think, are a very different experience for international students as compared to studying in Sheffield or something. So if your student is interested in kind of a more quintessentially British experience, then maybe London is not necessarily going to be the best place to go, just because it is so international, and there are so many international students at the universities there. But if that is what your scholar is interested in, or they want to be very kind of centrally located and want the ability to be able to easily travel to other places, then London is a great transportation hub and it has a lot to offer. But that's kind of just, they are very different experiences, so personal preference.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, particularly the students, for joining us today to share their experiences at Imperial, and what a wonderful lecture as well. I learned so much, so thank you very much for that. Thank you, everybody, for coming today to learn about Imperial. We'll be sharing the slides and the film later in the week, so hopefully if you want to go through the slides again and see what's been said, you'll be able to do that, and also sort of drill more into some of the statistics that Catherine shared right at the very beginning.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.